if the person raising your child you thought was dead was your own sister? When Aduni gave birth in a village hospital, she was told that baby died. Years later, in a different city, a child's familiar eyes unlock a truth too impossible to believe, and the mother begins a journey to reclaim what was taken. The rain came down like judgment, loud, unrelenting, and without mercy. Thunder cracked over the rooftops of Iregu village as Aduni gripped the edge of the hospital bed. Her contractions were too sharp, like lightning through her spine. The nurse barked instructions, but the storm outside was louder than their voices. A candle flickered in the corner, casting trembling shadows across the blood-smeared floor. She pushed and pushed, and finally, a cry pierced the night. Shrill, strong, and unmistakably alive. Aduni collapsed back, tears of relief mixing with sweat on her cheeks. "My baby," she whispered, reaching out weakly. But the nurse turned away. Moments later, a doctor entered, face blank, eye refusing to meet hers. He cleared his throat. "I'm sorry," he said, as if rehearsed. The child didn't make it. Aduni froze. "But I heard," she began, voice cracking. "You were delirious." "There was no cry," he said firmly, almost too quickly. She tried to sit up, but darkness pulled her under. Outside, the rain kept falling, washing away the sound, but not the truth. And in another room, a baby was wrapped in silence, not death. Days passed, but Aduni could not still hear the cry. It echoed in her mind like a song unfinished. Days passed, but Aduni could still hear the cry. It echoed in her mind like a song unfinished. Raw, real, and impossible to forget. But in her arms, there was only emptiness. No soft breath against her chest. No tiny fingers to wrap around hers. Only silence. The villagers came, bringing pots of pepper soup and words wrapped in pity. They clung their tongues and shook their heads. "God will give you another," they said. "You're still young." But their eyes were heavy with quiet judgment. Whispers followed her like shadows. Some said it was a curse. Others blamed her womb. Kunle, her husband, barely spoke. He would sit by the window, staring into the rain as if waiting for someone to bring the child back. When she reached for him, he turned away. "We have to accept what God has done," he said once, his voice cold and hollow. But Aduni couldn't. Late at night, she lay awake, hands resting on her still swollen belly. She'd felt the baby move. She'd heard the cry. a mother knows. And deep in her bones, something told her the silence she was living in was hiding something much louder. It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of day that begins like any other but ends with everything changing. Aduni woke up to the sound of chickens in the yard and the scent of burnt ogi on the firewood stove. She reached for Kone's side of the bed. Empty! Again. She wasn't surprised anymore. He had been drifting farther each day, like a boat cutting loose from the shore. But that morning, something was different. There was no trace of his clothes. His shoes were gone. The old leather bag he brought from Lagos is gone too. On the table, a single folded note lay on top of Aduni's bag. Her name was scrawled across it. Aduni. Her hands trembled as she opened it. I cannot live with ghosts. I pray you heal one day. Forgive me. Kunle. No explanation. No goodbye. Her knees buckled. She sat on the bare floor. The note crumpled in her palm. A screaming caught in her throat. Kunle had left not just her, but the memory of the child they lost. Or rather, the child she still believed existed somewhere. And just like that, she was alone. Utterly, painfully alone. 2 weeks passed. The compound grew quieter. The laughter of children next door, once a comfort, now pierced like thorns. Aduni no longer went to the market. She no longer cared to cook. Each morning, blurred into the nest, a fog of grief, suspicion, and questions that found no voice. Then, one afternoon, her sister Morayo arrived unannounced. She stood at the doorway in a colorful wrapper, her eyes scanning the room, then settling on Aduni. Gaunt, sunken. Morayo didn't say. You look tired. She simply knelt and gathered her sister into her arm. Rocking gently, whispering, "You are not alone." They sat that way for a while until Morayo finally spoke. Come with me to Ibadan. I have work, a room, a new life waiting. You can start again. Aduni looked up. Start again? Her voice cracked like dry ground. Yes, Morayo said softly. Let the village go. There's nothing left for you here. But Aduni hesitated. This village held more than sorrow. It held answers. Unspoken truths buried beneath its soil. Still, her heart ached for air, for change, for something to keep her from drowning. And so, she nodded, not knowing that the thread of her story was only just beginning to unravel. Ibadan was loud, alive, and indifferent. Aduni stepped off the bus and into a swirl of honking cars, hawkers shouting, the smell of fried akara dancing through the air. The city moved fast. Too fast for grief to keep up. Morayo's flat was small, but warm. Tucked above a tailor's shop in Bodija. The owner, Mama Taye, was an elderly woman with black dreadlocks and a quick tongue. You won't sit here and cry forever. She snapped the first week. Come and learn how to use thread instead. So Aduni learned. Her fingers, once seethed with sorrow, began to move with purpose. She stitched, hems, tightened seams, mended school uniforms, and with each stitch, something inside her began to mend too. Sometimes she caught herself laughing. The sound startled her. Morayo was always near, cooking, teasing, nudging her toward life again. For a while, it worked. The pain didn't disappear, but it softened, dulled by routine and fabric and the steady hum of sewing machine. Still, on quiet nights, when the street lights flickered and all was still, Aduni would place a hand on her stomach and whisper into the dark, "Where are you, my child?" Because healing, though it had begun, did not mean forgetting. It was an ordinary Thursday. The shop buzzed with noise. Scissors clipping, machines humming, women gossiping as they waited for their clothes. Aduni walked quietly, focused on hemming a school skirt when the bell above the door jingled. She looked up and her breath caught in her throat. A woman stepped in, her figure graceful, voice light with laughter, and beside her stood a little girl, maybe 6, maybe 7, in a neat school uniform. She had a small gap in her front teeth, just like Kone's. Her eyes were wide, curious, and painfully familiar. Aduni's hands trembled. The child tilted her head. "Good afternoon," she said politely, then smiled. Aduni couldn't speak. Her heart pounded like a talking drum. Those eyes, almond-shaped, brown, soft around the edges, her eyes. The woman glanced over. "This is my daughter, Ife," she said to Mama Taye, who had come to greet them. "We need her dress adjusted." Aduni stood, frozen. The child's name echoed in her head. Ife. Love. She whispered it without meaning to. The girl looked at her again, stared, then tugged at the woman's sleeve. "She looks like me, mommy." Aduni's knees weakened because the woman was Morayo. The air inside the shop grew thick as though time had stopped, tramping Aduni inside a moment she couldn't explain, couldn't escape. Morayo acted as if nothing was strange. She laughed with Mama Taye, handed over the dress, and fussed with her handbag. But Aduni couldn't take her eyes off the child, off Ife. That smile, at work. Even the slight dimple in her left cheek, her own dimple, the one she saw in the mirror every morning. Ife, Aduni whispered again. Muriel turned sharply. Her eyes narrowed just for a second. You know her name? Aduni swallowed. You never told me you had a child. Muriel smiled thinly. Not everything in life is meant to be told. Some things just happen. Aduni's fingers gripped the edge of the table. Her heart was racing. Her sister had never mentioned motherhood, not once in the years they'd lived together. She'd spoken of work, of flat rent, of church, but never diapers, never bottles, never lullabies. How old is she? Aduni asked, trying to sound casual. 6. Maria replied, then added, almost 7. Aduni's breath caught again. 6 years? That was exactly how long it had been since her baby disappeared. And suddenly, the silence from all those years ago roared back like thunder. That night, Aduni didn't sleep. She lay on her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. Ife's eyes burned into her memory like hot coals. The numbers didn't lie. The resemblance wasn't imagined. The timeless matched too perfectly. Her heart whispered what her mind was afraid to say out loud. The child Mariah called daughter was hers. But how? The next morning, Aduni feigned a headache and skipped work. While Mariah was out, she went into the living room and pulled out the bottom drawer of the wooden cabinet. She knew her sister well. Secrets always found hiding places. She found Ife's old hospital records in between expired church flyers and insurance forms. Her hands shook as she read the name of the birth clinic. Bamidele Maternity, located in Iregun village. The same clinic where Aduni had given birth. But something was wrong. The mother's name listed on the form wasn't Mariah's real name. It was a forged variation. The date of birth a perfect match. Aduni's breath caught in her throat. The nurse signature. She remembered it. A faded name from a painful night. Nurse Ajayi. And in that moment, doubt vanished. This wasn't just betrayal. This was theft. And her sister had stolen her child. Aduni waited until Mariah left the flat before taking the boldest step yet. She returned to Iregun village. Her feet felt heavier with each step toward the past. The roads looked the same, but everything felt different. She wasn't just grieving anymore. She was searching, and this time she wanted answers. The clinic where she gave birth had changed hands. The faded blue paint peeled from its wall like old lies. When she asked for Nurse Ajayi, a young attendant told her the nurse retired years ago. She lives near the church now. She said, almost reluctantly. Aduni found the house. Small, quiet, with a rickety veranda. Nurse Ajayi answered the door, her eyes cloudy with age. At first, she denied everything. "I don't remember you," she said quickly. But when Aduni mentioned the baby, the storm, the cry in the rain, something shifted. The old woman's lips trembled. "I was paid," she whispered. "Finally. I was told you couldn't care for the child, that it was best." "Paid by who?" A long pause. "Your sister, Morayo." The walls tilted. Aduni didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply stood in the silence, because the truth, once buried, had finally spoken. Aduni waited for Morayo to return from work. The flat was still. No radio, no laughter, no scent of stew bubbling on the stove. Just silence. Heavy, charged. When Morayo walked in, cheerful and humming, Aduni stood by the window, holding the birth record in one hand, the old clinic flyer in the other. Morayo paused. Her smile flattered. "What's wrong?" "I know," Aduni said softly. A bit of silence. Then Morayo's expression hardened. "No words." Aduni's hands trembled, but her voice didn't. "I know Ife is my daughter. I went to the clinic. I spoke to the nurse." "Ajayi." Morayo dropped her handbag. "You. What did she tell you?" "She told me everything." Morayo's eyes welled, but she didn't deny it. She sank into a chair like a woman, crying a secret too long.